Thank you, Connor. I really appreciate it. It's good seeing you again, my friend, after all these years. So,
for a while after the service, if you want to ask us questions, I'll be out here.
Perfect. If you want to talk with them after the service, they're going to be out in the fellowship hall. And now I want to go camping in Russia. You had me at lose 10 pounds, so I'd be all in favor of that. So glad you guys are here this morning. We have a lot to cover in John's Gospel this morning. If you're new with us, we've been going verse by verse nearly through the Gospel of John since the beginning of the year. And today is no different. Today we find ourselves in John chapter 9. And let's just jump into our text this morning, verses 1 through 12. I forgot my clicker and all the excitement. Let me grab that. While I'm waiting for that to activate, I want to mention as well, you may have noticed, it is Motorcycle Sunday. If you are planning to ride with us on our first and only motorcycle trip of the year so far, I need to see you immediately following the service to get a head count for where we're going to eat. And so just kind of meet me up here and give me kind of a head count if you're planning on riding over to Fort Madison with us this morning. All right, are you in John chapter 9? Follow along as I read, verses 1 through 12. As Jesus passed by, he saw a blind man from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day, for night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied it to the man's eyes. And he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this the one who used to sit and beg?" Others were saying, "This is he." Still others were saying, "No, but it is like him." So the man kept saying, however, "I am the one." And so they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man who is called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And so I went away and washed, and I received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know." The title of this morning's sermon is Seeing God at Work. You see, I believe that there's a problem with us, with you, and with me. I believe a lot of times God is working, He's moving, He's actively participating in our lives, and yet we fail to see it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're going to touch on that in a little bit. But in our story, what we see is it's not just the man who was born blind who is having trouble seeing. It's the disciples. And surprise, surprise, it's the religious leaders. And so this morning I want to ask you the question, is God working in your life? Can you see Him working in your life? 3 things from our text if you want to see God working in your life. And the first is this: clean your glasses, because narrow vision blocks your view. When we have a narrow way of thinking about things, when we think that God would only work as A or B, then that kind of blocks and gets in the way of how we're going to see God working. I don't know if you knew this about me or not, but I have terrible vision. Well, I used to have terrible vision. I got that LASIK eye surgery about 10 years ago or so, and that has helped improve things a lot. But man, I had glasses from the time I was in kindergarten. And here's a picture of me in the first grade with glasses. And I think it was mandatory that when you bought glasses in the 80s, that they were the size of your face. Okay? I think that was just like how they sold things back then. But one thing of having glasses as a first grader, I'm not the most responsible first grader you might ever have known. And so my glasses from time to time would not only break, but more often they would get dirty. And every Sunday, being a preacher's kid, my sister and I, we would arrive to church early. We'd be among the first ones who were there. And without fail, we would go see one of our favorite Sunday school teachers. His name was Bob Olson. We didn't have a children's minister, but Bob Olson was the closest thing that we had to a children's minister in East Superior Christian Church. And every morning we would go and we would sit in Bob's class, whether we were in his class as students or whether we were just there to kind of shoot the breeze and pass some time. And the first thing that Bob would do is he'd be like, give me your glasses. And so I'd take off my big clunky glasses, and he would clean them for me every Sunday. Because as a first grader, I'm not thinking about the chocolate milk stain I got on my glasses. All I know is that I've got glasses. And he would clean them, and there was nobody who could clean glasses like Bob Olson. And he'd put them in his mouth, and he'd go, and then he'd get out his little kerchief and he would wipe them off and he'd put them back on my face. And man, the world looked so much better after he'd cleaned my glasses. Here's the thing though, my vision can still be impaired so badly even today. Even after having LASIK, where I'm not seeing things clearly. But I'm not talking about physically seeing, I'm talking about my thinking. The way that I think about things can be clouded. How about you? And it makes it sometimes difficult to see God working. Why? Because narrow thinking blocks your view of God working in your life. Going back to our text, verses 1 and 2, it says, as Jesus passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Two things I want to draw to your attention out of this text. Here's the first. Don't put God in a box. Put yourself in the shoes of the disciples just for a moment. They've already seen a lot. They've been walking with Jesus now for quite some time. And they know without a doubt that He is God. He's turned water into wine. He walked on top of the water. He's fed 5,000 men by multiplying a little kid's sack lunch. They've had a front row seat to a lot of things. But they come to Jesus and they're like, hey, one who teaches me. That's literally what rabbi means. We're trying to get the bottom of why it is this guy is blind. And collectively we put our heads together and we realize there can only be one or two possibilities, and we need your help determining which of these two answers is right. Is it A, he sinned, or B, his parents sinned? Now, I'd love to spend some time talking about the theology surrounding that, but we simply don't have time today. But in short, what you need to understand is there was a lot of false thinking about how sin entered into one's life, just like there is today. Well, these disciples are saying this, and basically they were wanting to know what it is that caused him, this man, to be born blind. And they give Jesus two options. Hey, newsflash. It's not a good idea to be giving Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, a multiple choice test. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't know about you, but I found the Lord to be very unresponsive to my ultimatums. When I say, God, it has to either be this way or this way, which one is it going to be? I have found that God doesn't really respond to the way that I think He should respond. Why? Because God doesn't fit into the box that I want Him to be put into. And so Jesus answers them in verse 3, and His response is absolutely life-transforming. And I want you to grab hold of it this morning. Are you ready? Can you handle it? Verse 3. Jesus answered and said, it's neither that this man has sinned nor his parents, but it was that the works of God might be displayed in him. Did you catch it? That is life transforming. Jesus has just said there is purpose in pain. That is something amazing that maybe you need to grab hold of this morning. That there is purpose in the pain. That look, there's something that we're going for here. There's purpose. There's a reason for the pain. And that's an incredible truth. And maybe some of you need to write that down. The pain that you're going through, the difficult place that you're in, I'm not sure how it got there or why it persists. But what I do know that in your pain, everyone is going to see God working in your life. That's what I know. You see, returning to our text, Jesus basically told the disciples, it doesn't matter how he got there. It matters how God is going to use it. By the way, that's a great way to look at the things that are bad in your life. Sometimes we get focused, we get hung up on how did it get this way? Why did it get this way? And we lose track of the fact of how's God going to use this? Where's it going to go? Did it ever occur to you that the trouble that you're going through, the pain in your life, the difficulty that you're facing, is so that God's power might be displayed and demonstrated in your life? This really hit me hard this past week as I was working on this sermon. And at the end of it all, here's something else I want to point out to you. It was the disciples who were the ones who were blind. Because as they approach this man, they see this man as simply a subject, a topic of interest to talk about. And the disciples were blind to the fact that this was a man who was hurting and who was in desperate need of help. But Jesus is about to change that. If you want to see God working, clean your glasses. Look at things differently. Don't put God in a box. There's purpose in the pain. The disciples were the ones who were blind. If you want to see God working, secondly, you got to get your hands dirty. Involvement opens your eyes up to the fact that God is working. We just heard about a missions trip to Dauphin Island. Serving in Alabama is a way that those students and those adults got to see that God is working. And nothing will amplify your insight into God's doing, God's working, like involvement. People who sit on the sidelines don't see God working nearly as clearly as those who are involved in it. Returning to our text, verses 4 through 7, Jesus says, "We must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it is today. Night is coming when no one can work. And while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." And when He said this, He spat on the ground, and He made clay of the spittle, and He applied it to the man's eyes, and He said, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. By the way, it's no coincidence that Jesus is sending him to the place that means sent, to go get washed. And so the blind man went away, washed, and he came back seeing. If you want to see God working, not only in your life, but in the lives of those around you, here's what you need to do. You need to get on board. You need to get involved doing the work that God is asking you to do. Jesus says something remarkable in verse 4. He says, "We must work the works of Him who sent me." Jesus didn't say, "You guys sit back and watch me do all the work, put your feet up, I've got this." He said, we must work the works. He's calling them to participate, to get involved in ministry. And one of the most amazing things about the way that God works is that He wants to include you and He wants to include me in the work that needs to be done. You understand, don't you? God could do it perfectly, quickly, more amazingly on His own. He doesn't need us. But He wants us. And He's inviting you to work alongside Him. He's inviting you into ministry. And so He makes the point at the end of verse 4, we must work as long as it is day because night is coming. What in the world does that mean? Here's what it means. It means that life is short. Work for the Lord while you're able. Don't let another year, another month, another week or day go by where you're sitting on the sidelines, because you're going to miss out on so much if you are simply sitting down with your hands underneath you, not doing the work that He's called you to do. And more personally, more directly, you better find a way to serve here at Burnside Christian Church. Regardless of your age, regardless of your talents, jump in, find a way to serve at Burnside Christian Church, because you're going to see very quickly God is alive and well, and He's actively working. What's interesting to me is He's like, "Hey guys, we have a problem here. You guys are looking at the blind man as simply someone to talk about. I see him as someone who needs help. We're thinking totally different about this. And maybe you guys need to get on board, and maybe you should help me with this." And so what he says is you got to roll up your sleeves and get on board and start serving alongside. And one thing you need to understand about God working and working for God is that sometimes it gets a little messy. Ministry's messy. You need to understand that. If you've been serving for any length of time, people unconditionally, man, it gets messy pretty quick. Verse 6 is really interesting. It said, when Jesus said this, He spat on the ground, He made clay of the spittle, and He applied the clay to the man's eyes. Can we vote by way of committee this morning? How many people think that is disgusting? Right? But here Jesus is spitting and he's making mud, and he takes the mud and he puts it on the man's eyes. And why does he do that? I mean, I believe he could have just spoken and the guy's eyes would have been opened. But to me, this is a reminder of sometimes what ministry is like. Sometimes it's a little ew. Sometimes it's a little messy. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable. And that's sometimes how serving God is. But listen, in the end, it's always, always worth it. I've never been serving God where I thought, well, I'm not doing that again. It's always worth it. In the stress, in the chaos, in the uncomfortables, in the mess, it's always worth it. And even though Jesus did all of this, did you notice the miracle wasn't done yet? If you want to see God working, make a note of this. You got to do your part. Verse 7 says, he said to the blind man, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. And the man went away, and he washed, and he came back seeing. It's not all that surprising to me that God was faithful to do his part, and then he requested something from the man in order to finish the miracle. That's not surprising to me. Is it surprising to you? Because the Bible is filled time and time again with God doing his part, but then he always requests of us to do our part. It's not surprising that he does that in this case. Let me give you just a few quick examples. Remember the crossing of the Red Sea? Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. They get to the border of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is closing in on them, and they're all freaking out. What are we going to do? Right? And God's like, why are you crying out to me? Do your part. Move forward. That's what he's telling the people. And then he tells Moses, and as for you, raise your staff, and the waters will part. But did you notice in that whole story, God is also quick to convey what his part is, what he's going to do in the midst of that. It's not only true in the crossing of the Red Sea, it's true in the story of Noah and his ark. It was God who saved Noah and his family from the floodwaters, but it was God who shut him in the ark and protected them. But it was Noah and his family who built the ark. There's God's part, and there's your part. It's true in salvation. God does the heavy lifting when it comes to salvation. He sent his son Jesus to die on a cross for your sins. He offers grace and mercy and forgiveness and love. But then there's your part. And you have to receive him. And you've got to be obedient to him. And you've got to be immersed into him. I think it's so awesome and not all that surprising that Jesus makes this blind man do something for himself. And here's the lesson, I think, that we learn from this. If you want something more for someone than they want it for themselves, that's not going to work out good. Isn't that true? If you want your husband to get a job, but he doesn't want a job, how's that going to end? What's going to happen? If you give your kids a brand new car because you want them to enjoy that brand new car and they don't have to pay for it, and you pay the insurance and the gas and the car payment, and they don't have to pay for anything, how well are they going to care for it? And so God in his wisdom, I think, requires us to do our part because he sure is going to do his part. You want to see God working? Clean your glasses. Narrow thinking blocks vision. Get your hands dirty. Involvement will open your eyes to God working. And finally, if you want to see God working, just close your mouth. Careless words blurs vision. So the blind man has his sight restored, and that's going to set off quite a series of events, which we'll detail more next week. But I just want to read these verses. Starting in verse 8, therefore the neighbors and those who previously saw the blind man as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? And others were saying, this is. Still others were saying, no, it's just a guy who looks like him. And the blind man kept saying, no, it's me. I'm the one. And they were saying to them, how then were your eyes open? And he answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. And so I was sent away, and I washed, and I received my sight. And they said to him, well, where is he? We want to talk to him more about this. We want to question it. We want to get down to it. We want to figure out how this happened. And he said, I don't know. So do you see what's going on? This crowd, for decades and decades, saw this man simply as a blind guy who was a beggar. Just someone to babble about. God just did something awesome in his life, and they just want to try to explain how it happened. Aren't we guilty of that too? This is a terrible example. It's a poor illustration, but it's the only one that I could come up with. Man, whenever a newborn is born, a newborn baby is born, what are we talking about? Hey, how much did it weigh? Hey, how long was he? Was it a difficult birth? Oh, look, he's got his dad's nose. A baby has just been born. A new life. And we want to talk and explain about the mundane details of it? And that's a poor illustration, but I hope you're getting hold of it. Whenever a miracle happens, whenever something is amazing that God is doing, we seem to want to quickly explain it or try to figure it out or try to detail it in some way, and that's exactly what's happening in verses 8 through 12. And sometimes it's our ceaseless talking that gets in the way of seeing what God is doing. I want to read these verses again, and then I'm going to pray, and then we're going to be dismissed. I want to read it again. Is this not the one who used to sit and beg? Others were saying, this is him. Still others were saying, no, it's just a guy who looks like him. And he kept on saying, no, I'm the one. And so they were saying to them, how then were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. And so I went away and I washed and I received my sight. Now that would have been an awesome place for an amen. Let's throw a party. Let's celebrate what God has done in your life. But instead, verse 12, they said to him, well, where is he? He said, I don't know. So the question I have for you this morning is this: what awesome thing is God doing in your life? Are you seeing him work? Or are you too busy with other things? What awesome thing is God doing in your church? Sometimes our talking gets in the way of what God is doing. I want to ask if we just take a few moments to reflect on that question. What awesome thing is God doing in your life? And then I'm going to close in prayer. Let's stand together and reflect on that question, and then I'll close in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed.